Today I'm just going to do a quick overview of the popular VST plugin called Massive by Native Instruments, and I'm just going to show you the layout, and this tutorial is basically for anybody who's never really used it before and just wants to know how everything works. So to open it up, once you've downloaded it properly, it'll be in your little plugins there, the little plug shows, and I've already got highlighted Massive. I'm going to drop it into my MIDI and it'll automatically pop up for me with the default setting like that. So it's kind of daunting when you first open it, so I'm going to show you just the basics that you'll need to know to understand how to use the basic sort of operators within. So Massive is kind of interesting in the way that it uses wavetables instead of just straight oscillator waves, and what that means is that you can pick between two different two different waves, and it'll give you a table that will mix them together. So if you go all the way to one side, we've got a sine and a square wavetable right now. We just got the sine wave. Over here we get just the square wave. In the middle you'll get a mix of the two. So you can get some pretty interesting sounds. You'll notice that these other oscillators aren't making any noise. That's because the default sets the amp to 0, while the default sets the first oscillator's amp all the way up. So we're going to stick with that for now, and I'm going to show you how to find your ADSR, which is your attack, decay, sustain, release, and that's going to shape the sound that you're making. Now it defaults to your fourth envelope here, and you'll notice that we've got a little 4 here, and that's the way that Massive actually uses its envelopes and LFOs. You can drag them anywhere you want and set them to that particular knob or that particular effect. So right now, envelope number 4 is set to our master amp here, and it's set to a pretty quick attack, mid sustain, and then a very quick release. So what we're going to do is we're just going to play around with that for now. If you wanted to get, say, a plucking sound as opposed to that, what we could do is take the sustain level all the way down, and now we'll bring the release up a little bit. And there you got a little bit of a pluck. If you want to go for more of a synth kind of a pad, you can bring the sustain up, maybe bring the release back a little bit, move the attack back so it doesn't come in so quick, and then you got a bit more of a pad there. So you can mess around with that. If you're going into Massive, you might already have a bit of knowledge about how that works, so I won't go into too much detail. I'm going to show you how the filters work now. You'll notice right on each oscillator you've got an F1 and an F2 fader. So if you shift it all the way up to F1, that means that you're going all the way to filter 1. Shift it all the way down to F2, you're going all into filter 2. If you're in the middle, you get a little mix of them both. So we're going to send ours all the way up into F1, and we're going to make this a low pass filter. So right now we're getting nothing because the cutoff's all the way down, not letting anything pass. As we bring it up, we're getting a bit more of the high end. We'll keep it right about there. Maybe a little higher so that we can hear it. Your resonance is how loud the cutoff point will be. And now I'm going to show you how the series versus parallel function works, and also the mix 1 versus mix 2 within your filter. So if you're going into parallel, basically you can send two different signals going into both of them. They work parallel side by side. Pretty simple. If you're going into series, they're going to work one after the other. Filter 1 goes into filter 2. So if you wanted to get, say, a sound to go from one oscillator into your first filter and then a different filter effect on top of that, what you could do is set it into series and it'll go into 1, and this mix here is going to sort of dictate the output from both of your filters. So if we go all the way up here, all the outputs coming from filter 1, and now all the outputs coming from filter 2. So we want our oscillator to go through the first filter, then through the second filter, and then out the mix through the second filter. So we'll just get something that we'll be able to hear, the scream filter, and you'll notice that there's nothing coming out because our cutoff is all the way at the bottom on the second filter. Even though it's up here, we're all the way down here with the mix. You can hear it now, but when you put it down there you can't hear it. So we're gonna get some sound coming out of here. We'll get a bit of an effect so that we can hear a bit of a difference. And now that's just sort of the routing of the filter so that you know what these series and parallel means, mixed 1, mixed 2, and it'll help you when you're trying to do very specific sort of functions. So now we're going to get into the effects. Very simple. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. You just pick your effects, say you want some chorus, you've got your rate, you've got your dry wet. Very simple. A lot of the time people just use the effects within whatever DAW software they're using, but if you want to create a very particular instrument that you can move all around the place, it's pretty useful. But we're not going to use that for now, because I'm going to get into, oh, there's your EQ there. Also another thing you might want to just use in your DAW, but you can use it here as well. Just remember to turn it on with the little blue button. Now I'm going to get into the LFOs. This is where most people get a little bit more interested in what Massive has to offer. So what I like to do, I like to use the sync as opposed to picking the rate, just because not only is the rate a little hard to judge by ear, but it doesn't even give you any numbers, so you wouldn't be able to calculate it to make sure it's perfect. So that's one downside to Massive. They don't give you any numbers anywhere. I know some people who really like going by the numbers. So I'm going to switch it to sync. So just press this little box here. And now you'll get your ratio. Very simple. If you want 1/16, we just move the bottom one up. And now we're going to set the LFO by grabbing this little arrows sort of symbol here. And we're going to move it onto our second cutoff point because we want this LFO to affect that cutoff point. And then to affect the range of how much you want it to, how much range you want, you just grab the 5 and you move up, and you'll notice that it'll show the range on the knob. So very simple for that first LFO. And if you want to get rid of an effect or something that you've dragged in, just hold the Alt key and double click and it's gone. Now this is the Performer, a different kind of LFO, and it's actually pretty interesting what you can do here. Basically, I'm going to set to sync again. Let's go with 1/8. No, let's do 1/16. And you'll notice this little box goes across. It's basically a sequencer, but for an LFO. So now you're going to be wondering, how can I change the shape here if I don't want it to just have this little triangle that only sounds like this? Let's increase that a little bit. So you're going to be wondering, how can I get a different curve in here? And it's very simple. You just click the load curve box and it gives you all these different choices of curves. And we'll just do something simple. Let's say something like this. You can just grab it. We've selected the curve and now you can just drag it how you want it. So that's kind of cool, but that's not really the curve that I was looking for. Something a bit more drastic like this. And now, when we play it, you'll notice that it'll actually follow the different amplitudes of this LFO. And if you want to add in different curves, say at the end we want to do something like this. Just change the curve up after the peak. It's a little tedious sometimes. There we are. Just simple stuff like that, and it just takes a little bit of getting used to and a little bit of experimentation. There are some cool presets in here. Just additional rhythm is one that's kind of cool. And that's all I'm going to talk about for the Performer. So let's get rid of that in our cutoff. Alt, double click. And we're going to go through this step LFO. And this one's basically just a sequencer. So instead of messing around, I'm just going to pick one really quickly to keep the tutorial moving. We'll go with, let's see, power chord down here. And you'll notice that this one only goes for 4 bars. You can change the amount of bars by just dragging it out. So it's useful if you just got a little 4-bar repeating phrase, instead of sort of having to type it out 4 times, you just bring it down like that. And let's drag it out onto our cutoff. And you can change that up if you want, just altering it on your own. Say you want something more like that. So my personal favorite is probably the Performer. It's very useful, but the one that you use the most will be the normal LFO. It's just the easiest to get a simple classic LFO that you want, and it's not too complicated to get around. Down here you've got a couple more effects. I won't go over that. Just bit crusher, simple delay, feedback, your white noise over here that you might use every once in a while. And modulation is a bit beyond the scope of this tutorial. It's a bit more advanced, but if you want to apply it, just set it to your whichever oscillator you want, change the pitch, and then this will adjust how much ring modulation you get. And now there's a couple more things in here that are kind of hidden. They're these little tabs. So this is how you can change this this is just about your oscillators, and you can actually change the phase if you have 2 oscillators going on. We'll make them the same, both sine waves. Actually, let's get rid of that so that we can hear properly. So now we just got 2 sine waves running together. If we wanted to put it out of phase, say 180 degrees, just pull it over. And it's a lot quieter because they're almost canceling out because they're just 2 sine waves that are in complete opposite sync. So you can get some cool effects here, but it really isn't used that often. And now we'll go into this one here. This is your filter sort of keyboard follow. And it'll affect how much your filter is sort of scaled out over the course of all of your octaves. So if you're finding that you're not getting a whole lot of sound through your filters, say around the mid-range, you can drop it down and you'll get a bit more there. And it'll show you what notes you're actually hitting. So if up here, say we have a rhythm that's going all the, but we don't want that to be so loud, you can bring that down. And now it isn't so intrusive, and that's how you can just sort of balance the particular melody that you're working with. In the voicing here, this is how you can sort of change how many voices you're using. Pretty straightforward. If you want to add a second voice, third voice, fourth, and then if you want to actually change the difference in the pitch between those two, you can do that. And a lot of people can even use that as an effect. You'll notice sometimes you'll just get them sort of as they're sort of building up to a transition or something like that. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Your routings here, it just basically shows you how the routing works. In case you can't figure out why something's doing something, it'll highlight what you're using. I don't really use that often, but it is good to know. Your global is just an overview. And down here with your macro control is how you can actually plug in your sort of MIDI external devices to control different different settings within Massive. So that's all I'm going to go over today, just a quick overview. And it is a little daunting, so the best way to go about it is just to watch a bunch of tutorials and really spend a lot of time experimenting, just experimenting on your own on what you've sort of seen. So good luck with trying to figure out Massive. It is a tough one. There are lots of great tutorials out there for if you're looking for a particular sound to make. And next week I'm actually going to go over how to create sounds in Massive. So stick around and stay tuned.